Hey, so I talk a lot about change here and transformation. It's the topic of what I do, it's a topic of the conversations I'm having with you. And one of the things that I get asked so often is, is this normal to be feeling? And I'm talking about the struggles that come with change and sort of the ugly truths that come with change. And sometimes we have these experiences while we're in the midst of a transformation and we're like, wait a minute, is this just a sign that's kind of telling me to go back where I was and to just play it safe? I think, change is obviously hard. You've heard that phrase many times. Um, but why? Why is it so hard? So today I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ugly truths that we experience while we are in the midst of change or while we're trying to change. And oftentimes, these are things that really end up hindering our process and keeping us stuck. Sometimes I see people and, they're almost to the brink of some big aha moment, some big expansive experience, some big change. And they feel so much resistance inside to the change and to the ultimate goal that they end up turning back around and going back to safety. And it's so normal to do that. First of all, if you've ever done that, know that you're not alone. I've done that as well. But what's important to know is that if you want to create change in your life, if you want to truly feel a shift, then there are some hard things that you're going to come up against. And so I kind of just wanted to uncover those with you now. So take with this, what it is that fits, leave behind what doesn't. But I'm hoping that it'll potentially help you to identify some of the very normal blocks that come up and help you work through them a little bit more. So when I thought about this, I think the the main thing that we're trying to avoid when we change is pain, is the fear of pain. And what I mean by this isn't like pain necessarily that's like physical, although at times um, there can be the threat of physical pain happening. Think about, abusive relationships, um, or maybe even like having a child, right? Like that's a physical pain too that comes with change. But I think what I'm mostly wanting to refer to in this video is psychological pain. This comes with the idea of discomfort. This comes with when we feel out of control, when we feel potentially an identity crisis happening, when there's lack of safety and security and what to expect next. Change means having to endure a certain level of psychological pain. Even if you're like super ready for the change, there is some grieving that sometimes takes place. There's some uncertainty, there's discomfort. Otherwise, we'd all just be changing all the time and expanding and having no problem doing it. And I wouldn't have to work and everything would be great. But that's just not the case, right? And so when we think about the pain that comes along with change, I think there needs to be a certain level of preparation and maybe even reframing of what pain brings us. What does pain hold for us? And something that I like to do, or that I encourage you to do, is to reframe this pain as part of the process. I think that when you look at whatever is coming up for you, this anxiety that comes up, maybe it's a sense of panic, maybe you're feeling a little bit of grief or a lot of grief, whatever it is, say that's part of the process. That's showing me that I am growing. That is an indicator of growth. And when we can sort of reframe pain in this way and hold space for it and say, like, that's actually a really good sign that I'm here, even though it hurts, even though it's scary, even though it's uncertain and I'm feeling insecure and all the things are coming up. This means I'm not staying comfortable. This means I'm not reverting back to what is familiar or what's secure or what I've always known. This means that I'm stretching and expanding and growing. Another thing I wanted to touch on that I just kind of mentioned was this identity crisis. And I think that when we change, what we don't realize is the person that we were has to change, or the person that we think we were has to change, or the person that everyone else thought we were has to change. And this is one of the most difficult pieces because it is so deeply ingrained in us to identify who we are and to also show people who we are through the way that we're self-identifying. And so when we start to change our and who we are, then that means some people in our lives may not like that. That means some people in our lives may have a big problem with it, and you might be disappointing people. And sometimes people leave. People leave our lives when we change sometimes. And this is such a painful experience because it's something that can make us really question, our process. And we're so geared towards feeling a sense of belonging and feeling loved that when we lose that belonging with a loved one, or we lose a feeling of love, all of our alarms can go off and we can go into this mode of like, what have I done? Oh my God. This doesn't feel right. Some people are like, oh, okay, well, that just kind of shows, who these people really wanted me to be, and what they really loved me for. And that's like, a healthy spin to put on it for sure. But for most of us, it sucks. It's totally painful. So, um, and then the other piece of this too is the self identity too, and the relationship you have with yourself, and trying to figure out, without that way of doing things that I used to do things all the time, without what I used to identify myself as, um, what's left? It can feel like a really big void, and it can feel extremely scary. Identity crisis is no joke. And I think a lot of us go through many of those moments in our lives. And when you're really present to the identity crisis because you are choosing it, it can be really, really um, jarring. And so, a way to reframe this, or maybe not even reframe, but a really good question that you can ask yourself that is potentially more expansive is, who am I without the way that I used to be? So, for me, for instance, I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and I've always played this caregiver within my family. And although it is something that's like really deeply ingrained in me now as an adult, it was something that was really draining as a child to constantly be taking care of other people. And when I became an adult and I decided to finally change that feeling of exhaustion and change, like, I don't want to be feel drained and exhausted around my family all the time, I decided to say, I no longer want to be that role of figuring everything else out for everybody else. And I think I told a few of my siblings that. I even told my parents that. And luckily, everybody ended up being very accepting of that. But for some time, there was some confusion. Well, who puts Christmases together, right? Who makes sure everybody's texting each other, or whatever it was that the roles that I was playing were. And for me, trying to figure out, if I'm not needed, then do I still belong in my family? Can I still be loved? And it took some time to figure out, what it was that I wanted to be, who it was that I wanted to be, and deciding, I can feel free with my family. I can feel joy and warmth when I'm with them and not drained. I can feel peace because of this decision, and they can love me more authentically for who I am as a person, not what I can do for them. And so that's just an example from my own life about an identity crisis that um, took some time to navigate and was a bit painful at first. So maybe you share a similar experience in some way. I'd love to know. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about that I touched on a little bit earlier too was this feeling of unsafety, uncontrollability, lack of security when you're in the midst of change. And, I think it's important to note that we deserve all those things. We deserve to feel like we're safe. We deserve to feel like we're secure. We deserve to have a sense of agency and control over the decisions we're making in our lives. But when you're changing, none of the old things are familiar. Nothing's predictable anymore. It doesn't feel safe. And even if we're changing from something that was once a miserable thing to a positive thing, there's still that, like, well, what's next? There's a lot of uncertainty. Humans, we learn how to survive by predicting our environment, by predicting how things will go. And the more intelligent we've gotten over, evolution, the more we like to predict and the less risk averse we are. So just know that that's very normal to be feeling, but also it's not a sign that you need to go back to what you were doing. Just because you're scared does not mean that you aren't meant to change and aren't meant to have experience growth and transform your life. It means that you need to build resilience. And so this idea of resilience, this is the third and final piece that I'm going to bring up, is resilience means a number of different things. It's not just like how much pain can you take. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about how many more times can you get back up after you've been pushed down. I'm not talking about that either. And I also think that those things that I just said, I think maybe minimize some people's experience of trauma. And so I never want you to feel that, like, just because you're afraid of pain or doesn't mean you're in the wrong. And I don't want you to feel like if you keep, feeling pain over and over again, that you should just stick it out. That's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, the opposite. What I mean by resilience in this context is the ability to condition yourself to hold more space for ambiguity, to hold space for uncertainty, to say, I feel so uncomfortable right now and so insecure right now, but I'm going to be okay. And I'm going to keep pushing forward. And this is part of the process. That builds resilience. That builds a sense of knowing what it is that we can hold space for and what it is that we're able to adapt to. And maybe even teaches us that we can trust ourselves even when we really don't trust a ton of things outside of us because it's such an uncomfortable new place to be. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what discomfort is outside of us. We develop a trust in ourselves to handle whatever it is that comes our way and to make the choices for us that are good for our well-being and that are good for our careers and good for ourselves in relationship or needing to leave a relationship. That's one thing that I see a lot of times is this: what if I leave the relationship and I regret it? Same with career. And it can take years, sometimes never happening, but it can take years to finally make the decision of, well, I can be in that insecurity because I know that, I deserve a good career, I deserve a good relationship, and I desire love, but not at the expense of my well-being. And so I'm going to go into this more insecure, uncertain phase, this ambiguous phase of life, this transition phase of life, because I can trust myself in that. I know that whatever comes my way, whatever is decided, whatever challenges I face, I'm going to keep pushing ahead and I'm going to figure things out, and I've got what it takes. So remember, it's all part of the process, all of it. And it's always a good sign to be feeling discomfort and to be feeling some of these ugly truths. It means that you're changing, and I'm really proud of you, and you should be proud of you too. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time.